Hello and welcome to the first ever MTG Goldfish Pauper video content. This is also my first video for the site. Today we're going to be looking at a really sweet Pauper deck, WU Rhystic Tron. So this deck is pretty cheap online like most Pauper decks are. It's about 17 tickets, and it is great. So basically it's based around using the Tron lands to generate a ton of mana. So once you generate that ton of mana, you can do a couple different things. You can play big cards like Ulamog's Crusher, or you could play a card like Rhystic Circle. And Rhystic Circle is a card that lets you pay a bunch of mana and basically shut your opponent out of dealing damage to you for the rest of the game, which is pretty sweet. So it's a control deck. It's a little bit different take on Tron compared to the usual Tron deck that you see running around, which is red, blue, and green and has Fangren Marauder. So let's look at the pieces of this deck. First, let's look at the mana base. We're playing 4 of each of the Tron lands because we want to get to Tron as soon as possible in every game. We have 4 Tranquil Cove to fix our mana. We have some untapped mana sources, which are pretty important, 1 Plains and 2 Island. We're also playing 2 Remote Isle. So one of the things that can happen with this deck is you get way too much mana and not enough to do with it, and you really don't want to draw lands when that happens. So Remote Isle can cycle for 2 colorless mana, which is pretty cheap when you have Tron online, and get you to a real card if you don't want to draw any more lands. Next, we'll look at these cards that fix our mana base. So we're only playing 21 lands, and we need a little more oomph to be able to cast all our spells. 4 Expedition Map usually finds missing Tron pieces, but can go find colored mana if need be. 4 Prophetic Prism, you pay 2, and enters the battlefield, you draw a card. So it doesn't cost you a card to play, and then it lets you filter your mana to whatever color you need. And also 3 Azorius Signet, which fixes our mana as well as ramps at the same time. Now we move on to the actual meat of the deck, and how we're winning the game. So up top we have our creatures. We're playing 4 Seagate Oracle and 4 Muldrifter. These are basically for the card draw and for blocking. You're not generally attacking in this deck with these smaller creatures. However, you can do it if need be. Then we're playing 3 Ulamog's Crusher. This is the big beater. This is one of the primary win conditions of the deck. You play this, and then even if they have chump blockers for it, they're having to sacrifice 2 extra permanents every single time it attacks, and it can end the game very quickly. Down below, we have 2 other things that win us the game. One is Rhystic Circle, which is part of the deck's name, is Rhystic. So with this enchantment, when it enters play, it has an activated ability. It costs 1 colorless mana. Any player may pay 1 colorless mana. If a player doesn't, I get to prevent all damage from a source of my choice this turn. So when you have a bunch more mana than your opponent from having a bunch of Tron lands out, you activate this a bunch of times. Your opponent can try to pay and counter it a couple of times, but you'll have more mana than them most of the time. And then when they run out of mana or they decide to stop paying, you just start choosing all their creatures. You choose all their creatures, none of them can deal damage to you, and you do this each turn. And you basically lock them out of killing you. And then you just keep on drawing cards until you can find a Crusher. Or the one of Karvek's Torch in the deck. So this is just a giant burn spell. It's completely possible to win the game with this, even if you've dealt 0 damage to your opponent with creatures so far. You can generate 21 mana, do X equals to 20, and just take someone out of the game. This is a pretty slow deck, and this is a pretty slow win condition of a card. Most games you're not going to win with just a single torch. You'll get in there with a couple Muldrifter hits or an Ulamog's Crusher will end the game, but occasionally you do need to dig for the torch and just burn the opponent out, and that is an option. Lastly, let's look at our interaction in the deck. So besides just blocking or getting lucky with a Rhystic Circle and a ton of mana, we have 4 Condescend for countering spells. It's very good when you have more mana than your opponent, because you get a counter spell, plus you get to Scry 2, which helps you dig to the business cards in the deck. 3 Repeal, which is pretty decent with our own creatures. So if they go to try to kill one of our creatures and we repeal one in response, we get to draw a card, and we also get the value from casting them again, the enter the battlefield effect from a Seagate Oracle or a Muldrifter. Additionally, Repeal has a really cool combo with the 2 cards below, Journey to Nowhere and Oblivion Ring. So what you can do is you can cast, say, a Journey to Nowhere and put the trigger on the stack, targeting an opponent's creature, and then you repeal your own Journey to Nowhere in response to that. And then what happens is the trigger for Journey to Nowhere leaving the battlefield happens before you exile the creature, and then you exile the creature after. So basically the creature is permanently exiled, there's no way the opponent can get it back, and you get to redraw the Journey to Nowhere to use again, as well as the card drawn from Repeal. So you can get some value there if you have a lot of mana and both those cards in hand at the same time, or you can just repeal your opponent's creatures to buy you time until you can do something else. Additionally, we're playing 1 Capsize, so this is basically another win condition, although you can sometimes just pull off a value Capsize, but often you're wanting to only cast this when you're able to buy it back. And you can fire this off on creatures to be able to, prevent dying to damage, or you can start sending, 1 or 2 lands back to the opponent's hand a turn until they can't cast anything. And that's a pretty strong option as well. This is very good against control. It's not so good of a card against aggro because it costs 3 just to bounce usually a creature. But what can you do? And then we have 4 Journey to Nowhere and 2 Oblivion Ring. The 4 Journey to Nowhere hit creatures, the 2 Oblivion Ring hit creatures or other non-land permanents. Generally, they're going to be hitting creatures themselves as well, but it's nice to be able to pick off the occasional artifact or enchantment that might give you trouble. So let's go ahead and get to the matches and see how they go.